How's everybody doing? Good morning, Infragistics. Is this Cranbury? Yeah. It's a wonderful day in Cranbury. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to see Dean. Great to see you again. Thanks for being at Jealous here, as always. And Ambrose, we missed you, but nice to see you as always. And Tobias and everybody here who helped bring me out and made the invitation. My name is Mark Hurst. As Tobias said, I am the founder and CEO of a company called Creative Good. We're based in New York City, and we focus on the customer experience. I founded the company in 1997, and I know Infragistics is, what, 1989? Okay, so you remember back in the bad old days, not many people talked about customer experience. Maybe you did and we did, but not too many people outside of this. The field has changed quite a bit to the extent that people are really talking about customers a lot today, and that's going to be the topic of the talk, about how we include customers. I do run the GEL conference, which has some representatives from Infragistics every year, and we can, maybe in Q&A I can tell you more about GEL if you're interested. Today I'm going to talk to you about my book, Customers Included, which I wrote to help distill the over 18 years of experience I have in this field in a way that is easily digestible and kind of fun to read. It's a quick read. I hope all of you will read it. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the case studies in the book today. The premise of the book, I think, is both very important for what Infragistics does, and it's also very simple. The premise is, when you are making some decision or design or strategy that impacts a customer or a user, on balance, it's better to include the customer in that decision process rather than to totally ignore them. And that's it. That's my last slide. Thank you very much. Yeah. Mic drop. I would do a mic drop, but it would just kind of be a thud. It's not a very heavy mic. Let's not ignore our customers. That's what I was going to name the book, but this seemed a little more pithy. Customers included. Do you really think that we need a book that encourages teams not to ignore their customers? Do you think we really need a book to send out to the corporations and the nonprofits and the organizations around the world making decisions to tell them not to ignore their customers? Yes, we do need this book. And one of the first case studies that I wrote for the book explains why. So here's the first story today. This is a story from sub-Saharan Africa. It's about clean drinking water. And a few years ago, there was an innovation that promised to deliver more clean drinking water to rural villages in sub-Saharan Africa. If you know that part of the world at all, you know that a lot of the villages are pretty parched, and any innovation that would deliver more clean drinking water to the residents of those villages would be a lifesaver. It would be a very important and impactful innovation. So in 2005, the weblog Boing Boing reported on just such an innovation. A play pump, an ingenious water pump driven by a children's roundabout, what we might call a merry-go-round. And here's a diagram that accompanied the post. You can see here on the left, there's a merry-go-round with kids spinning, and it's cleverly connected to an underground pump that, when it spins in the normal activity of play, pumps water out the tap to mom, who's waiting with the bucket. So the media response was immediate and very positive. And the media descended on South Africa, where there was a pilot project already having been installed. And they came back with photos and videos that look like this: brightly colored merry-go-rounds spinning, water gushing out of taps, and kids delighted, as you would expect, with their new playground equipment. So that was 2005, right? So 2006, in my city, New York City, at the Clinton Global Initiative, First Lady at the time, Laura Bush, stood next to Bill Clinton himself, and together they handed a check to Play Pumps International for $16 million. The idea here was that Play Pumps International, essentially a startup at this point, was going to go and take play pumps into sub-Saharan Africa with this as the seed capital. Although it was not a for-profit startup for the most part, this was more of a donation to buy a bunch of play pumps and get them installed. So think about it from Play Pumps International's perspective. At this point, they have what? They have great press. They have a clever innovation. They're taking on one of the more important problems in the world today. They have celebrity backing and a lot of money. So you can guess, with all of those assets, where this project went. It went right here. And it went there rather quickly. Now, why did the plate pump fail? A lot of people had this question when the news broke that the supporters were removing their support from the project. What could have happened? Everything seemed so clever and so cool. It was so innovative. Well, the reason why it failed was dramatized nicely in the country of Malawi, where there were 2 Canadian volunteers working with Engineers Without Borders. Some of you may know that organization, kind of like Doctors Without Borders. Their names are Owen Scott and Duncan McNichol. And what they did was they took a video and posted it on YouTube of their village plate pump, showing what one of the problems was with this quote-unquote innovation. What they did was they held a race to pump a single bucket of water between a plate pump and another pump that we'll see in a second. So they said, okay, folks, we're gonna run a race, and our first contender is a plate pump. And so Owen here runs over as the stopwatch begins counting up the seconds. He starts spinning the plate pump as fast as he can, okay? Mimicking the rate of rotation that kids at play might be able to deliver to the assembly. The water, as advertised, starts coming out of the tap into the blue bucket. And for context, here we have the plate pump spinning. The water comes through the trough, past the chicken, very important, comes out through the pipe into the blue bucket. When the blue bucket was totally full, they clicked the stopwatch. 3 minutes, 7 seconds. Okay, not so bad. Kids play for 3 minutes. Mom gets a bucket of water. Pretty good trade, you figure? So then they go to the second contender. And this is something called an AfriDev, which I did a lot of research on clean water management in sub-Saharan Africa. If any of you have detailed questions or want more resources, the AfriDev, I can tell you, is one of the most popular hand pump installations in that region. It's very popular and very effective. And it works just like you think. Click the stopwatch, pump, pump, pump. Blue bucket fills up, and they click the stopwatch. Stopped at 28 seconds. Okay, oops, 6x. There's an issue with mechanical inefficiency with this device. 3 minutes and 7 seconds or 28 seconds. Well, it's funny how that didn't come up on the stage of the Clinton Global Initiative when they provided $16 million to this project. But you could say, wait a second, why are we only seeing Canadian faces in this video? I thought this was customers included. Where is the voice of the person who is a resident of the village and is most affected? And I'm glad you asked, because they actually went to the teachers in the village and asked them one single question. Do you have a message that you would like to deliver to the group installing these pumps in villages like yours in this area? And the head teacher here says, oh yes, thank you for asking. We do have a message for the group. The message is, stop immediately. Rather abrupt, don't you think? After all, the kids of the village are getting free, did I mention? Free playground equipment. Why is he saying stop immediately? Yeah, it pumps a little bit slowly, but my gosh. Well, is there something else going on here? Yes. In the neighboring country of Mozambique, which had about 100 plate pump installations, the government also saw some problems with their plate pumps within their borders, and they contracted with an independent research agency based out of Switzerland that does this sort of work. And these researchers went on the ground in Mozambique to see what the reality was of the plate pumps. And they wrote a report that is still online today, as is the YouTube video that Duncan and Owen posted, by the way. Find it in the endnotes of this book. You can read this report and watch that video today if you'd like. And in about a 35-page report, these researchers pointed out many problems with the plate pump, but I just want to highlight one phrase. They found no signs that communities had been consulted prior to installation. In other words, the people affected by this project were not included. In other words, the customers were, in fact, totally ignored. This is the conclusion of a very rigorous study, a national study of these plate pumps. Well, you could say, even then, maybe we still don't see what the problem is. Yes, the pump is rather slow. Yes, the head teacher said to stop immediately. And yes, the Swiss said the communities hadn't been consulted. But what really is the problem? Well, here is, after 18 and a half years, maybe the most important learning that I can share with you today, if you don't listen to anything else that I say in this talk, is that if you want to understand the customer experience, you have to understand it from the perspective of the customer. This is a rookie error that companies make all the time. Yes, we do customer experience. We have our framework, and we have our researchers, and we have ourselves, and we have our brains, and we have everything inside our own context, and the customers are out there somewhere. No. If you want to understand the customer experience, you must take the customer's perspective. Now let's do a thought experiment. Do you know how water management works in rural villages in sub-Saharan Africa? Many to most of them have one water source. These are small villages away from the city centers. There's one water source in the center of town, and generally on that borehole sits a hand pump. More likely than not, it's an Afrodev, the kind that we saw in that video screenshot. And in the normal life of many of these villages, say about 5, 6, 7 years ago, life is going on as per normal, and all of a sudden, a Jeep rolls into town full of men these people have never seen before. These strange men pop out of the Jeep, walk up to the hand pump in the center of town, rip it out of the ground, and put in its place a merry-go-round. Pour the cement, bolt it down, clean up the tools, and hop back in the Jeep, and they're about to drive away, and the people come running and say, what do you think you're doing? What did you just do? And the guys say, I don't know, some rich Westerner wanted you to have this. Get in the Jeep, and they drive off. All right, now again, taking the customer's perspective, let's be optimistic, and let's say there's free playground equipment in the center of town. The kids come running, yay, and they all start spinning on the merry-go-round. Okay, I'll stop for a second. My wife and I in New York City have one child. He's almost 8 years old. Some of you, I'm sure, have kids maybe around that age. How long do you think a 6, 7, or 8-year-old can spin on a merry-go-round before they're ready to vomit? Scientists say it's 3 minutes and 7 seconds on the nose. 1 bucket of water. And then they're ready to go play with something else. That's what kids do. They like to play with lots of different things. And in fact, I'm not making this up. If you read that SCAT report, they actually talked to some of the kids on the ground in Mozambique, and the kids were saying, we just can't spin anymore. It's like, it's too much. So the kids spin, and then they run off, and now guess whose turn it is to spin the pump? Mom. Except now, it takes her 6 times as long to get 1 bucket of water. Now here's the crazy thing about all this. I have not yet dropped on you the biggest problem with a play pump. Can you believe that? Some of you, I'm sure, are mechanically minded. I'm not. But what tends to happen to new and untested mechanical devices? They tend to break. And so not if, but when the play pump broke, and in fact, by the time they got here, most of those 100 play pumps were broken. No water's coming out. The play pump, it spins, but nothing's coming out. Something's wrong. Okay, folks, we got a problem here. The water's not flowing. So who got the spare parts to repair this thing? Nobody. Who got the training on what we're supposed to do to maintain this device? Nobody. Whose idea was this anyway? Nobody. They weren't included, and so they were just cut adrift when this play pump failed. And that's why when PBS Frontline sent a reporter back to South Africa to find out what had happened with the play pump, she had found women who were without clean drinking water for months. And so in this project, the $16 million that started them off, $10 million of that came from us through USAID. It's a taxpayer-supported organization. So in this kind of sick coda to this whole case study, we as American taxpayers paid into a $10 million fund to reduce access to clean drinking water in Africa. And that's what's at stake when we wonder whether our decisions really have an impact on someone else and whether it matters to take their perspective. Yes, it does matter. It certainly mattered to these individuals. Now, one of the other supporters of this, one last PS on the project, then we'll move on. One of the initial funders of this project was the Case Foundation. They gave, and that's co-founded by Steve Case, the founder of AOL. They gave $5 million to the play pump. And I want to preface this by saying I am absolutely not trying to disparage the Cases who've gone on to do very good work, including in water management. But when they removed their support from the plate pump, the Case Foundation posted on their blog talking about why they were removing the support from the plate pump. Now, what do you think their conclusion was? What went wrong with the project? Was it that in hindsight, we didn't think about the supply chain or the training of the communities or actually the mechanical inefficiency? No. Their conclusion was that it's the very nature of innovation. This was the very nature of innovation. You try things, you take risks, sometimes you fail. And if you cast your hearing over to the West Coast, you often hear things like, let's fail faster. Let's have a conference celebrating failure. Let's promote our failures. Let's fail. And you know, sometimes, and I make light of it, but sometimes that actually is a legitimate approach to innovation. When you have plenty of capacity to fail, let's say you're a venture capitalist who wants to invest in 10,000 different ideas. That's great, go out and fail, guys. Maybe we'll find one Instagram in this field. But other times, there is, let's say, an established company that is making decisions that wants to, hold on to your seatbelts here, folks. Sometimes companies want to succeed in what they do. I certainly do. And if you want to succeed, you want to stack the deck in your favor towards success and away from failure. And the plate pump was just such a project. There was very little capacity for this thing to fail. You needed this thing to succeed, and what would it have taken to get a little more reality on the ground before putting this decision in motion? How long do you think it would have taken to spend some time in those villages to understand the context a little bit better? I don't think very long. I don't think this is the very nature of innovation, in other words. Do you think that, we'll move on to the next case study, do you think that a company like Ford Motor Company would make a mistake like this? Do you think that's possible? Certainly there are startups that ignore customers, but what about Ford? They have a 100-and-something year history. Well, a few years ago, they decided to create something called My Ford Touch. This is an early prototype of the system. Some of you may drive a Ford vehicle that still has this system installed. It's practically custom in consumer vehicles from Ford right now. The idea of My Ford Touch 6-7 years ago was to allow drivers a touchscreen interface that would allow them to access most of the common functions of the car, the air conditioning, the radio, the GPS, and so on. And so what Ford did was they contracted with a design firm to go and create the system. The designers, by their own admission, started by sequestering the designers in an ideation room for weeks without any customers anywhere around. Do you think that's a good start to the project? They were coming up with game-changing ideas, full-blown, coming out of their brains. I'm sure there were Postit Notes and modeling clay and everything else. And when they had made all of the key assumptions of the project, then they came out of the ideation room and went into rapid prototyping and testing with users. Rapid iterative testing. And you know how that situation works, right? You come out with a foam core and cardboard prototype, you bring users in, ask them to go through a few tasks, you look at where they failed on small things, and maybe they make a couple of suggestions, and then you rev the design slightly, slight course corrections, and then repeat as necessary. In fact, here are some of this is from a conference presentation where they were talking about their design process. You can see the Postit Notes showing the actual suggestions that users had in the rapid iterative testing. This one says, for example, maybe the temperature could be written on the knob itself, from Matt. Thank you, Matt. Interesting suggestion. Very small tactical design suggestions. But keep in mind, the basic fundamental assumptions and, dare I say, the strategy for this project was already set in cement before the users were ever given a chance to have a voice. So, oh, and this is what they said about their design cycle. If it wasn't really clear already, this is a direct quote. They said our design cycle was minutes. We use rapid prototyping and rapid working. You can see the focus on speed. They were very concerned with how fast they were. And look, I'm all in favor of speed. I think going fast is great, but you want to make sure you're not driving quickly to go over a cliff. You want to make sure you have a good direction or strategy before you start going fast. Okay, so here was the production implementation. This is the version of My Ford Touch that went off of the assembly lines. and went into consumers' driveways and garages. And as it usually happens with a new launch of a technology in the car industry, Consumer Reports did a test drive and got an early review. And you know Consumer Reports, right? They're very straightforward, very modest, and staid in their language. Here's what they said: "My touch controls give a new meaning to the word unfriendly." Zing. Am I right? Consumer Reports, what got into you? Because the busy touchscreens force you to take your eyes off the road. If you want more detail, go to YouTube and look up "Frustrating My Ford Touch," posted by Consumer Reports. And they go through all the problems with the touchscreen interface, which is just completely complicated. But I want to draw your attention to one other part of this problematic interface. The touchscreen is up here, okay? So here are the controls, the physical controls below the touchscreen. And I don't know if you can see it in the back, but here's a volume knob here, makes sense. Airflow knob, that's fine. And then over here there are these interface elements. Bring your attention to this section right here, somewhat redundantly called My Temp. Who else's temperature are we going to be modifying today? Doesn't matter. It's the My Temp section. So here we have a minus. You can't really see it, but there's a minus here and a plus here. So if you wanted to make the car cooler, you would push the minus button, right? Actually, wrong, because these aren't buttons. They look like buttons, but see, in Ford's bid to be innovative and future forward and elegant, they made these buttons flush with the dash. It's just so much more elegant. It's like you're wearing a black turtleneck as you use the interface of the center console. Yes. The problem is, as elegant as it is, drivers do need raised buttons so that they can feel them while you're driving. So Car and Driver did a test drive of one of these vehicles and said for the first time in their history, a test driver on the test track had to literally pull over to the side of the track and come to a stop so that he wouldn't die while he was making the car cooler. That was the problem with it. Now, you can say, we're having some fun with this poor interface design, but did it actually have any impact on the business? Why, yes. In fact, the Times talked about the very important J.D. Power quality survey that ranks, not qualitatively, quantitatively, from best to worst, the brands of car makers. And usually Ford was, out of about 40 or 50 brands, usually they're number 4, number 5. They're near the top. Within a year of My Ford Touch coming out, they went down to, what was it, 17th, and then they kept going down and down and down. I think they made it down to the 30s before they started making a few changes to the system. This was an incredibly expensive and ill-advised mistake for Ford Motor Company. It affected their sales, it affected their support costs, it affected their brand equity, it affected everything. All of the other decisions in the car might have been good, but they messed up the key user experience in the central column. And what was the original sin of this project? Customers were not included. Yes, you could say, we brought customers in for rapid iterative testing. We gave them some tasks. We gave them some Post-its. Wasn't that enough? You answer me. No. And let me ask you, what was the delta? Same question I asked around the play pump. How long? Let's do another thought experiment. Let's run research in our mind here. Let's sit down. I just sat next to Tobias as we drove from the train station. Be a passenger in someone's vehicle. We on? Be a passenger in someone's vehicle as they're driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour. How long do you think it will take for you to observe their normal, actual experience of driving before you notice that they are reaching for the central column without taking their eyes off the road? How long would that take to make that observation? Minutes. So we're talking a delta of maybe a day of research before the designers can come back to their super fancy ideation room and say, hey everybody, we've noticed an important pattern. Drivers like to touch buttons so that they don't die while they're on the highway. It's not that complicated. Spend some time with users and see what's important in the experience. But you know what? We're innovative, so let's take risks. Oh my gosh, okay. Enough about product design. We've talked about a pump and a car. Do you think this idea of including customers also holds some weight in the design of a process? where there's not a tangible product. And do you think that Walmart would make this mistake? Let me raise the stakes here. Do you think that Walmart, which is known for its logistics and merchandising, would make a mistake of ignoring customers in their merchandising and logistics? Yes, they would, and yes, they did. And yes, they paid the price for it. Here's what happened. A few years ago, Walmart executives in Bentonville, Arkansas looked out, surveyed their kingdom. This is what it looked like. And they were matching this to some troubling data in their sales reports that some of their more affluent customers were defecting from Walmart to go shop at Thank you. And the Arkansas executive said, why would anybody leave this wonderful scene to go shop at Target? Well, they kind of knew the response. Sometimes I like to run Mad Libs. What's an adjective that describes this scene here? Chaos. That's a noun, but we'll go with it. Chaos, chaotic, cluttered. You know, that's the typical Walmart scene. And the executive said, look, if we're cluttered, and Target, by the way, is not as cluttered. If we have poor, dimly lit aisles that are cluttered with product, Target has nicely lit, wider aisles with somewhat curated product. Let's be more like Target. So they planned to launch a major decluttering initiative. Before they did, just to validate their decision to launch this decluttering initiative, someone said we have to include the customers. So what Walmart executives did is they ran a survey. Some of you may have checked out at a big box retailer and gotten a survey question on your sales slip. Have you seen this? Walmart did this, and they asked hundreds of thousands of North American customers one question. The question on the survey was, dear customer, ready for this? Would you like it if Walmart stores were less cluttered? Think about that for a second. Would you like it if Walmart stores were less cluttered? That's exactly what the shoppers said. It's amazing. 99.99999% of customers said, yes, please declutter the stores. And the executive said, good job, us. We were right again. And so they went forward, having validated their decision with a statistically significant set of 398,000 data points, and they went ahead with something called Project Impact. Now this, let me remind you, this is Action Alley, the main avenue through the store that's usually cluttered with products. See, today we have tutus on sale for $39.88 in both blue and pink. This is the normal clutter of Walmart. After a huge expense of removing the clutter from the stores, which affected both merchandising and logistics, as promised, this was Walmart during Project Impact. Look at those positively Target-like aisles. You can do donuts in the middle and not ram into one of those annoying products. Okay, so again, let's take the customer's perspective as we've done before with the pump in the car. Now let's take it with a shopping cart. Stay-at-home mom does her monthly shopping trip to go get staples of food and clothes and so on at her local Walmart supercenter. She takes the cart into the store that has quietly been redesigned to look more like Target. She goes through the now very clear Action Alley and doesn't think much about it. She's walking to where she needs to go. And she gets to the grocery section, and every month they pick up one container of Hellmann's mayonnaise. Now, you know, there's Hellmann's families and there's Kraft families. And this family, in our example, is a Hellmann's family. So she comes to the mayonnaise aisle in the grocery section, and she's looking for the Hellmann's mayonnaise, and she sees Kraft mayonnaise. That's all cool, but we're Hellmann's. There's Kraft. Where's the Hellmann's? Finds a clerk. Excuse me, sir. Where's the Hellmann's mayonnaise? I only see the Kraft here. And he says, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Walmart doesn't carry Hellmann's mayonnaise anymore. She goes, what? What would possess Walmart to remove Hellmann's mayonnaise from the stores? And he says, I don't know, some rich Westerner wanted you to have this. And he walks away. And she's left there, they removed my favorite product. Now, let me emphasize here, Walmart removed key brands from the stores, and these are not some artisanal Brooklyn pickle brand. I mean, these were like brands like Hellmann's mayonnaise. It may not have been that particular one, but they were about at that stature. Some sections of the store had lost 15% of their inventory overnight. Poof. What do you think happens to same-store sales when a retailer known for a wide variety of product removes 15% of their product. Can you guess? The sales skyrocket. No, customers don't like that. They buy less, and guess what else happens? They go shop at Target. Maybe they have what I want. They've got cleaner aisles too. So sales went down and down and down and down as the defections continued until finally the CEO, under a huge fire from analysts, finally reluctantly and sheepishly put the clutter back in at great expense. How much do you think this cost Walmart? Let's talk about quantifying customer experience, shall we? Remember, they had to take the clutter out of the stores, and then they had the drop in sales, so a huge opportunity cost, and then they had to put the clutter back in. How much did it cost? This 2 or 3 year misadventure cost them, you could estimate it at about $1 billion. Billion with a B. So, if anybody ever asks you, hey, all that hanging around customers, talking about customers, does that actually have any impact on a company? You can say, oh, not much, it's just about $1 billion. But you and I both know it's only when it's 10 billion that it really begins to matter. Yes, it has an impact. If you're Walmart, it has an impact on the bottom line. If you are African villagers, it's a life and death situation. And if you're Ford, it's both. Okay, let's keep going, keep going. Okay, enough doom and gloom. Although those are kind of fun case studies, don't you think? To hear about mistakes. But let me give you a fun case study that's actually positive that tells us how we should be including customers. Anybody here a fan of this place, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York? Brooklynites? No? All right. Trust me on this, it's great. Well, I live in Manhattan, so Central Park is maybe a little better, but I don't say that around Brooklynites. But Prospect Park is very, very nice. People go hiking, cycling, picnicking, and it's a wonderful place. But very few Brooklynites know the story of why Prospect Park is as nice as it is today. And I'm going to tell you that story today, so you can lay this on the next New Yorker who thinks they know everything, and you're going to tell them a story about their own city they don't even know. Here was this park, Prospect Park, in 1980. Defaced bust of JFK. Here's one of the buildings inside Prospect Park. Literally burned out, not figuratively. The buildings were burned out. The statues were defaced. There was litter everywhere. There was unspeakable crime to the extent that people who lived in that neighborhood around Prospect Park did not even want to enter their local park for fear of getting mugged. So, and I have to say, as part of the context here, it wasn't just Prospect Park or Brooklyn. I mean, all of New York City was under some great economic pressure, financial pressure at that time. But this is a story about how Prospect Park came back to life. So the Parks Department needed to find somebody who wanted to take this on, and so they hired a woman who at the time, well, I think was 30 years old. Her name was Tupper Thomas. She's the hero of our story. And let's see, she was 30 years old, she was not from New York City, and she had never run a park before, so she was perfect. Tupper Thomas got started right away trying to turn this park around. Now, put yourself in Tupper's shoes. What do you do? And by the way, this is not a completely foreign example. We all face a Prospect Park 1980 at some point in our careers or our lives. Some intractable problem that has 18 modes of brokenness, and we have limited resources. Does this sound familiar to any of you? It certainly does to me. That's why I like this case study, because she's the hero. Here's what she did. Well, first, wait, I'm not going to give you the punchline yet. What a lot of people do is they say, all right, gosh darn it, we've got 18 problems. We're going to have 18 solutions. Let's go to the whiteboard. All right, so what's number 1? It's crime. What's number 2? It's litter. What's number 3? The burned out buildings. What's number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Okay, those are our problems. Let's do a little triage now. Let's apply the solutions. Crime, police patrols, boom. Litter, litter pickup, boom. What's next? And I think this was the kind of command and control problem solution, top down, I know the answer approach that had been tried to very little effect in Prospect Park over the previous 20 years. Didn't work. That's what you got. So now what you going to do? What is Tupper Thomas going to do? I think her lack of experience was a great benefit to the city because she did something that none of her predecessors apparently had done, and it was completely radical. You're not going to believe what she did. She went outside, and she started spending time in the park with the people whose experience she was trying to improve. She spent time with her customers. the recipients, the people on the other side of the experience that she was in charge of. And what she found very quickly, not through some highfalutin research methodology, just by hanging out and looking around, meeting people, talking to them, she found out that there was one group of residents, these are homeowners or renters in the neighborhood who were using the park for legal and positive reasons, okay? What was that group? Anyone who has not yet read the book. There was one group left of Brooklynites who were still going to Prospect Park for some legal reasons. Someone always yells out, drug dealers, and I say, your version of legal and my version of legal, a little bit different, but I'm not going to judge. It wasn't drug dealers. I'm sorry?
Walking dogs?
Yes, exactly right. Dog walkers. Well, one, it was this guy. It's just one. Look how happy he is. So there were dog walkers. Very good. And what she did is she found out what it is the dog walkers wanted. Now, how do you find out what a customer wants? By the way, that's basically the first question I start the book off with. I think that's the golden question for all. How do we find out what customers want? Well, here's what she didn't do. She did not, again, hold on to your seats. She did not come up with a solution in the solitude of her office and then go out and ask the user to validate it. What's your name?
Justin.
Justin? Justin, nice meeting you. I've got one question.
Yeah.
Would you like it if there was less crime and litter in Prospect Park? Maybe a few more police? Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much. 99.99% of the people I surveyed liked my idea. No. That is not including the customer. Here's the other thing that she did not do. She didn't go and prototype the solution and bring people in and say, come on, give me pint-sized feedback on what I did, like what Ford did. She didn't do that. She did not ask people to validate her decision. Oh, and here's one other thing she didn't do. Justin, I want you to blue sky with me. We've got a broken park here. What do you think we should do? Customers included. Come on, design it with me. In fact, why don't you just go ahead and design it? Here's a Postit note. Go ahead, design. No. Customers are not designers. Customers are not validators of our own flawed assumptions. Customers have none of those jobs whatsoever. Customers only have one job. Listen carefully. The only job of a customer is to show us their true and authentic customer experience. Okay? When I talked about sitting next to Tobias as he was driving me, I was observing how he drove. Sorry, but I was. That's observing someone in their element, having a true and authentic experience. So by hanging out with these dog walkers, Tupper Thomas didn't ask customers what they wanted. She found out what they wanted. And what she found out was that there was one thing dog walkers wanted more than anything else. Yes, they wanted less crime and litter. Who doesn't? But dog walkers being dog walkers, there was one, in the language of my book, key unmet need that dog walkers had. Can you guess what that was? You got the first one right. What was it?
Garbage can?
Garbage cans. Always the first guess. Excellent guess. But no. There's something else. There's a clue in the photo. They wanted the ability to take their dogs off the leash. In 1980, there were no leash laws. Not such a thing. But by hanging out and talking to people and what people said and muttered and how they acted, oh my gosh, getting pulled around on this leash, and then observing people take their dog off the leash, and that's when the police showed up. There's a summons. Oh, there's a police presence here. Great. And by observing people and drawing the conclusions, she came up with the innovation. Do you see the difference? The customer didn't design the solution, the designer did, or the product manager did, or the executive did. The customer was simply there having an authentic experience, and it's our job to, in that observation, notice the patterns and come up with a solution. The solution was leash laws. She goes back to the city government and says, ladies and gentlemen, I have one request. What is it going to be, Tupper Thomas? Is it going to be more police patrols, litter pickup like your predecessors? How much money do you want? No, I don't want any of that. You don't want any police? No! I want leash laws. And they say, this woman is rather strange, isn't she? This park is broken in 18 different ways, and she wants some law. Okay, put the law in the books. Leashes, fine. She goes back to the dog walkers, and she says, good news, Justin. Between the hours of 8 and 10 in so-and-so field, you can take Fido and Spot off of the leash, which is what I observed that I think you might like. And Justin says, oh my gosh, After so many years, finally, there's one person who made my experience better. Now, what do you think happens when you make the experience better for a group of target customers? You get more of them. It's like gravity. It's not that hard a concept. If you make the experience better for a set of customers, you're going to get more of them. And that's exactly what happened. More dog walkers showed up, and why wouldn't they? It was a better experience. And they started telling each other, word of mouth, virality, and buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. And then, as the dog walkers started coming into the park, then the joggers said, well, gosh, there's some yip-yip dogs right there. I probably won't get mugged with yip-yip dogs around. So the joggers start coming into the park. And then the ball players start coming to the park because the joggers are all ready. And then the moms with the strollers, and the neighborhood comes back to Prospect Park. And this is what it looks like today. And of course, it's not simply because of that one decision, leash laws. I don't want to overstate the importance of that. The important thing is how Tupper went about what she did. Take very detailed notes here because this is very, very, you need a doctorate in research to understand this methodology. Ready for this? Spend time with customers, find out what they want, and give it to them. Spend time with customers, find out what they want, and give it to them. And she rinsed and repeated for 20 years until this happened. It's not an overnight solution. You might notice I have tried not to say a single buzzword because I detest them in this talk. And this is not a magic method that I'm overpromising what's going to happen. It's hard work and it takes time, but it does work. And you can change the life of a city. What can you do within a company or an industry if you take this approach? Spend time with customers, find out what they want, and give it to them. Okay. Now, I used to end on that happy note, yay, 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 clap, clap, clap. Okay, now let's go to Q&A. And Q&A would always begin with one question. See, I do include my customers. I already know what someone here is thinking. And it's usually, I won't point out to an individual, but it's usually about 2/3 of the way back, and there's someone who's like sitting there, and I already know who it's going to be. And then Q&A, any questions? Yes, Mark, I have a question. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. Okay, and did you ever, as a side note, do you ever notice someone totally agrees with what you're saying? That means they disagree? Totally agree with what you're saying. Nice job. Adorable. But that's what you do. You like to spend time with customers. Oh. But I follow somebody else. I follow someone else's example who, I'm happy to inform you, showed us that you can do okay by ignoring the customer. Now, I want you, we're going to do a Vulcan mind meld right here. I want you not only to visualize that individual, but I want you to visualize that photo. Yes, that one. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Did I get it right? Okay. And this photo is kind of magic. I saw it in the printer room the other day. It's really iconic and helpful. Reduces toner. Here are the solid gold hits that this individual brought to us, starting from those candy-colored iMacs all the way down to the iPad before he died. And when he died, people wanted to know how did he do it, because everybody wants to bottle the magic that is Steve Jobs, and they're still trying to do it. How did he do it? And so all of the journalists and authors and commentators and experts told us what we should learn from Steve Jobs' legacy, and here are the two most common things that I read in my research. Number one, he didn't buy into focus groups. And that's just a stand-in for customer research, okay? They're not talking focus groups in particular. They're saying Steve didn't spend time with customers. The great unwashed, are you kidding? And number two, this is a direct quote from an actual book, this actually got published, that said the lesson from Steve Jobs is don't listen to your customers. Do you think that's the lesson from Steve Jobs? That's the lesson we want to take away from this gentleman's life and work, that we shouldn't listen to customers? Well, there's a certain myth, and I think Steve himself enjoyed it. I've talked to Apple employees who, quietly off the record say, yeah, he kind of liked that, and he kind of fed into it, but that wasn't the case. And it's one thing for me to assert, oh, but Steve did listen to customers. He was concerned with the customer experience, but it's another thing to provide proof. And if any of you read the Walter Isaacson biography or the new one that's just come out, they're very nice books, very good, give different angles on the guy, but somehow they missed one scene. I believe that this is the only book that has ever been in print talking about what I think is maybe the most important scene from Steve Jobs' career in 1997. A couple of months after I founded Creative Good, and I remember it well. You remember the 1990s, see the patches on his jeans and the mullet? That was right there. No? Gosh, you guys are younger than I thought. I certainly remember it. So this is 1997, and in 1997 spring was really important to Apple for two reasons. Number one, Steve had just returned after, what was it, 7-8 years out doing Pixar and everything else. He was just back as their CEO again. And number two, small detail, I don't know why I even bring it up, but oh yeah, they were bankrupt. They were about to go out of business. But other than that, everything was great at Apple. So Apple had a few months of cash left, and Steve, the new CEO, is sitting down for a Q&A at the WWDC. This is the event that's just about to run in San Francisco. This was the WWDC. And he's sitting on the stool, and by the way, this is on YouTube. You can find it in the endnotes, and you can watch it today. It's a great little Q&A session. So people are standing. These are the developers of Apple products, of Macintosh products, and they're saying, "Steve, what about the QuickTime 2.0 library?" And he's giving whatever tech answers he can to address those questions. And then someone stands up out of nowhere and is very angry and says, "Steve, I've got a question. I want to know what you've been doing for the last 7 years." Very aggressive, and sits down and watch the YouTube video. You can actually hear the whole audience say, "Ooh," because someone has actually challenged the boss, challenged the CEO. He was near mutiny with these developers. And Steve, in response to this challenge to his authority, very public, you know what he says in response? Nothing. Steve Jobs, can you imagine? Steve Jobs at WWDC was made speechless by this challenge to his authority. 15 seconds, watch the video, he sits there with his head bowed. And I think he's thinking, okay, no more reality distortion. I think I've got to come clean with these guys and tell them the truth, the absolute unvarnished truth. That's my only way out of this. And when he opens his mouth, he gives one of the greatest ad-lib speeches in corporate history as far as I'm concerned. He says, because this was the beginning of the turnaround, he says, you know, we need a strategy for Apple to turn this company around and to allow us to sell billions of dollars of products. This is a company that's 3 months away from getting sold for parts. Yeah, we need a strategy to make billions of dollars in sales, and I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to come clean with you guys. This is the strategy from now on Apple is using, and the strategy is we're going to start with a customer experience and work backwards to the technology. Now think about that. You're right back as the CEO for a few days in your baby, the company you founded. You're in a room full of hostile, mutinous developers, technologists, and you're telling them the truth. He had every reason in the world not to say this, but what he told the technologists was that Apple is no longer a technology company. We are a customer experience company. He bet his company, and I would go so far as to say that Steve Jobs bet his career and his legacy on this idea that the customer experience is worth investing in. In fact, that is the entire reason that his company exists. I happen to think that it's the entire reason any company exists, but he actually made it explicit. And if you say, well, some people say yes, but then let's say the iPhone, what's he going to do? Ask people on the street, what kind of a phone do you want in 2006? Are they going to design that? No! Have you listened to what I've been talking about? Sorry, it's not you, Justin. It's somebody else. I'm projecting. I'm sorry. What he did, and read the Isaacson biography, to start the iPhone project, here he was halfway down his list of solid gold hits. He had Johnny Ive and the rest of the designers. They had real momentum. They knew they were a dream team. How did they start the design process for the iPhone? Do you think they went into their ideation room and started sketching world-changing ideas? No. Isaacson says, well, he quotes Steve Jobs saying, the first thing we did was we pulled our blocky chocolate bar Nokias and Ericssons out of our pockets, and we put them on the table, and we said, okay, what do we hate? What is terrible about this user experience? They started with the pain points. And there are other things I could tell you offline about how Steve and others at Apple spend time directly with customers. I mentioned some of them in the book if you want to read in more detail. Steve lived this. This was not simply words. The iPhone, among other innovations, came from this approach. So here's the real conclusion to this talk. If you want to be like Steve Jobs, include your customer. Don't ignore them. Maybe more importantly for the world, if you want to be like Tupper Thomas and bring around the full-scale transformation of a neighborhood, a park, and a city, include your customers. Don't ignore them. Thank you very much. All right, now it's time for question number 2. If you yell it out, I'll repeat it in my handheld mic here. No questions? It was all completely crystal clear, right? No counterpoints?
Come on, Liz.
I got something wrong.
I could, but it might be frowned upon.
Please do.
Okay. Do you know?
Just say you're asking for a friend. It's all good.
Not true. I'm happy.
Yeah.
Are you familiar enough with what Infragistics does that you are you familiar with our company enough to answer? How do you think that Infragistics does this?
That is the one question that I refuse to answer. And that's often question number 2. Please give us a review of how we're doing. And first of all, I don't know enough, and I can't know enough until I get this, spend some time with your customers, which I haven't done. And second of all, it's not the right context to start diving into that. There are contexts that I could create, that could help create, where that conversation could be had. But let's talk about other companies or other contexts. The goal here, my goal in this presentation, is to give you some case studies, some language, some bullet points, anything that I can give you that you might be able to use in your conversations as you go forward from this. So what can I give you that would clarify something, or do you want to challenge me on something? That's totally fine if you think I got something wrong, or is there some other case study out there that you'd like me to comment on? Yes?
What's your view on what's your view on using data? So, there's sort of this trend with companies saying they're data driven, they're looking at data of their users. Is that enough in your estimation? Does it play a part? What's your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question, and I think that is one of the deficiencies of my book is that I didn't treat data with as much material as I could have or perhaps should have. But I do have a perspective on it. I think that there is a major decision point that every company and every product manager has to face at some point, and that is, who do we put our trust in? Do we put our trust in the data, i.e. the machine, or do we put our trust in human beings? And by setting it up that way, I'm pretty sure you can guess what side of the tracks I fall on. Now, some companies will say, and I have this conversation a lot with people who come to me and they say, I like this approach, but my political rival or this other group or the boss or whoever says, I don't want to listen to any of this because the data says X. But that's not what we're seeing when we talk to people. Okay, my response is not that we should throw away the data or that we should disregard it. That's not it at all. Data is a tool and it's an opportunity to add value to what we do. But there has to be some human thought that informs the context and the interpretation. So in our work at Creative Good, for example, we always start a project. First thing we do is ask the company for the dump of the biggest the set of data that they have available or access to their master dashboard of analytics and everything else. Data is incredibly important to set context. But after all, it is humans on the Creative Good team who are reviewing that. We never abdicate our responsibility as decision makers to an algorithm. And I know I'd get in trouble in Mountain View for saying something like that, but I don't believe in the end that the algorithm is the one that we should give our responsibility to. It's not, by the way, only in companies where this decision point is happening. It's in our personal lives where we have to decide to what extent do we want to hand over our responsibility to the data and the devices and the machines in our lives versus giving some currency to our own human potential. That's a longer conversation. And I wrote a book about that point in 2007 called Bit Literacy, if you want my further thoughts on the topic. It's free in the Kindle store. Yes?
I work in the services group for, okay, I'll wait.
This way the other offices can get a question.
Sure,
I
yeah,
work
great.
in the services group here.
Yes.
And part of our design process is to speak with users. That's what we recommend. And a lot of times we'll hear from customers that someone high up in the organization, no, I know what our users want. I know what they need. How do you overcome that objection?
Well, first of all, whoever is telling you that needs to read this book. How do you overcome the objection? Let me throw a couple of other objections your way, because that's one of 5 that I start with. This is page 2 from the book. Here are the excuses that I've heard in 18 years. Top 5. Letterman's gone, but we can do a top 5 list, right? Number 5, there's not enough time in the project to spend with customers. Trust me, I totally agree with you, okay? I totally agree with you, but there's just no time, meaning I don't agree with you. Number 4, why spend time with customers? Because customers don't know what they want. I mean, what are we going to ask them to design the thing? Come on, you and me know this. These customers are not that bright, come on. Number 3, exactly what you said. I already know what customers want. Trust me, I totally agree with you. And here's my favorite. We use our product, so wait a second. If we simply do what we want, then we're customer inclusive because we're customers. Okay, good. We never had to talk to a customer again. That took care of that. Number 2, customers aren't designers, so we shouldn't ask them to design the product. We already covered that. And number 1, my absolute favorite excuse for why companies don't include the customer. First, we need to launch our product, and then we'll find out what customers think. Oh, yes, you will. That's the best kind of customer feedback. Totally honest and unvarnished. Look, I don't have the magic response for you. I think there's a lot of ways to position a conversation, but in the end, it comes down to leadership. I mean, I'm building, as I write this book, I'm building towards the punchline. I start with funny case studies like the pump, and then I go through research methods. Those are important, don't get me wrong. And then the third and final section of this book, I hope all of you read to the end, is called the organization. Because in the end, customer experience, get me now, customer experience is not a tactical discipline that can be moved over to room 3 to do some research. That's what Ford tried to do. Customer experience is not a tactical side auxiliary, nice to have little tactical thing. Customer experience is the reason the company is in business. And as such, it has to be the concern of leadership. And if you encounter a leader anywhere who says, I don't have time, or I already know customer, for any excuse that they don't want to hang out with customers and find out what they want, red flag. This leadership needs to read this book and decide what team they're on. By the way, what is my authority to talk like this? What is my basis? Who do I think I am? Where did you get your MBA? I didn't get one, I'm sorry. My authority is saying that I didn't come up with this. These are not new ideas, and I hope that I've given you a buzzword-free presentation. This is not a trendy magic bullet. This, if you want to read more, go in the recommended reading section on page 158, and one of the top 2 books that I recommend is called The Practice of Management, published in 1954. This is all about customer experience. Can you believe it? Didn't say anything about the web or product management, or didn't say anything about disruption. Oh my gosh, is it worth reading if it doesn't say anything about disruption? 1954. Who wrote The Practice of Management? Peter Drucker, the father of management theory, and I have quotes throughout the book from Drucker talking about the importance of customers and why customer experience is kind of the reason we're in business. So if you meet a business leader who is having trouble with this concept, say, oh, don't spend any time with that Hurst guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Why don't you go to Peter Drucker? You've heard of him, right? Read him and give him the pull quotes from the book. This is all a customer is for, a company is for. A company is simply a delivery mechanism for customer experience. If leadership is not concerned with the customer experience, then what are we doing here? Thanks for the question, Justin.
One more?
One more.
How you doing? My name is Michael Hurst. I am in operations here. And
M. Hirsch.
M. Hurst.
I like that.
We're very close.
Yeah, you sound like a cool guy.
I hope I do. I hope everybody's entertained by my talking right now. First question obviously is I'm hoping I'm going to get a free book out of the deal.
Oh no, these are all from me. Did you want some of this? Sorry, I travel with
You did a
these.
very good job.
My security blanket.
The question I have for you though is something that I always talk about with a lot of people is empathy and sympathy. Is empathy and sympathy for people and their opinions and their thoughts, is that something that can be learned?
Well, the question is empathy and sympathy, is it important and can it be learned?
Because I think you have to have that in order to.
Okay, well, I told you about Drucker's book is number 2 on the list. Number 1, the number 1 book on customer experience, other than this one that I can recommend, is called Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. Anybody know anything about Danny Meyer? He's the number 1 restaurateur in New York City history. He founded places like Gramercy Tavern, 11 Madison Park, Union Square Cafe, and so on. And most recently, a few years ago, he founded something called Shake Shack, which is actually doing quite well. So, and Dean, you might have seen Danny and or Randy, the Shake Shack CEO, speak at Gel. They're friends of mine, and I am such an admirer of what they do because they live. So Danny wrote a book called Setting the Table, about how you bring about a company culture that has people providing hospitality to guests. Of course, he's talking in the restaurant context, but it's really applicable anywhere. And for him, what's most important is not training people how to properly open a bottle of wine. He'll get to that. The most important thing for him, he says, is finding people who have the capacity of empathy, the capacity to empathize with someone else's perspective. He says that is, I don't want to put words in his mouth, you should read the book, but it's practically the number 1 thing that his entire enterprise does, is find, hire, and manage people who have that capacity. I think it is incredibly important. The one place where I may differ with Danny is that he asserts in his book, and I take it seriously, he knows what he's talking about, he asserts that you can't teach it. He says people either have it or they don't. And I'm not so sure about that. From my own experience, we at Creative Good will run listening labs where we are observing a customer, hanging out with customers, finding out what they want, and if possible, we have the senior leadership observing alongside us, behind a one-way mirror or via video or whatever it is. And a lot of these executives, you wouldn't necessarily call the most empathetic individuals, but when they see a customer having an authentic customer experience, it pushes some kind of button, some deep-seated button in the human psyche where they go, oh my gosh, that's what we're doing to them? We've got to change this right now. And you see a transformation at the top level of leadership that then infuses the entire company. People they may not be naturally empathetic in their day-to-day lives, minute to minute, but most people we've encountered, if you bring them in a context where they're in front of a customer watching another human being live and work with the decisions that you've made that affect them, people have empathy. You see amazing transformations. So that's where I differ with Danny. I think it's not that we're teaching people empathy. I don't think we're teaching a whole lot. We're simply facilitating an interaction, and that's really possible. I think that's what's at stake here. Can companies out there make the commitment to make the customer experience a strategic priority and get everybody in the company to spend some time with customers? So I hope this has been helpful, and find me afterward if you have more questions. Thanks. Thanks, Tobias.